All right, good morning. We're here to talk about some of the more modern attacks on Active Directory, specifically attacks against your AD database and how to defend against this. So first off, my name is Bob Krebs. I'm one of the pre-sales consultants here at Quest. Now I'm showing my age, but I've been responsible for managing, migrating, and securing Microsoft platforms for my entire career. In my personal time, I'm a huge golfer and a skier. And again, I'm showing my age. I spent a lot of time back in the day following around the Grateful Dead. I recently went to the Sphere in Las Vegas to see Dead & Company, and I definitely recommend seeing a concert of any kind there. It's quite the experience. Gerald, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Bob. Yes, I'm also a pre-sales consultant. My name is Gerald Lott. And as well as Bob, I've been doing this for about 30 years on the same Microsoft type platforms. I am more of a saltwater hobbyist where I like reef tanks. I like all kinds of fish, especially the exotic ones. So I spend lots of time and money working in that area when I'm not doing this type of consultant work.
Very good. So again, we're here to talk about protecting your Active Directory from attack, and I'd like to talk about some of the more recent examples that we've seen in the news. Before we do that, just some quick statistics of the current threat landscape today. First, 80% of security breaches involve compromised identities, and most of those involve stolen credentials in some way, shape, or form. The second one on here is also interesting. 7,000 password-based attacks per second in 2024, using many different techniques. So that really tells us that identity is still the path that attackers are using to get to your critical assets. Cyber attacks are becoming more frequent and more sophisticated, and the cost of a data breach and the cost of AD downtime from a ransomware attack has soared in recent years, as you can see by these last two statistics. So 21 days is the average downtime from a ransomware attack. That's a long time. And when you put that into a cost perspective, according to Forrester Consulting, it's about $730,000 per hour when you're down. The customers that I've worked with to customize their exact scenario, this seems to be a pretty conservative estimate. So those are some very compelling statistics. Now, looking at a couple of recent examples, the first one here, I believe this happened in like April, and actually I think it was Easter Sunday, was the attack on Marks and Spencer. They are a retail giant based in the UK. In this attack, you can see right here, I've highlighted it, that the attackers gained access by stealing an offline copy of the NTDS.dit file, which is essentially their Active Directory database. They used those password hashes to move laterally around their network and ultimately used a double extortion tactic by stealing customer data before encrypting all of their systems. This severely disrupted their business, exposed their customer data, cost them hundreds of millions in profit, and more importantly, totally ruined their reputation in the industry. So that's just one example. The second example, this was another attack right around the same time, and I believe it was the same hacker group called Scattered Spider. They were the ones responsible for the Marks and Spencer attack. Also, they hit another major retailer in the UK called Co-op. In this one, they also stole the DIT file. They extracted password hashes to further spread around their network. They ultimately stole the contact information for all 6.5 million members. But luckily, they avoided a major ransomware attack, so they got lucky. But this still ended up costing them millions of pounds and damaging their reputation. So with those examples in mind, how do we shift the focus to defense, right? What kinds of things can we do to stop this from happening? So today we're here to mainly focus on auditing and preventing DIT file access, right? That is the sole focus of this. But really, the first thing you always have to start with is hardening your Active Directory security. What we're talking about there is looking at the hygiene of your environment and identifying the vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and attack paths that exist in your AD that attackers can use against you. Kind of the other half of that is implementing a tiered security model. DIT file extraction requires elevated privileges. So getting control of your administrative groups and isolating your privileged accounts will help reduce your attack surface. As I said, hardening your Active Directory and implementing a tiered security model is not the main focus of today's session, but towards the end of the slide deck, we're going to put a link to our Security Guardian solution, which focuses around those two areas specifically. So let's talk about the next one here. Another best practice is to disable old network and authentication protocols and audit for the usage of those older protocols so we know where and when they're in use. That'll help with that piece. The third thing after securing and modernizing your AD is actually monitoring for suspicious activity. This is the main focus of our session today. In this case, we're talking about attempts to access the DIT file. Gerald's going to show you what that looks like within our Change Auditor product in just a moment. But perhaps the best defense is to actually block attempts to access the DIT file using a unique feature of our product called object protection by configuring what is known as protection templates. Again, Gerald is going to show you what those protection templates look like in just a moment, but these templates should be a critical component for your AD security. Now, before I turn it over to Gerald, this is a list of many of the common AD attacks that are out there. The product we're talking about today can audit and alert to these and many others. Obviously, we're going to focus specifically on DIT file extraction in our examples today and our screenshots, but towards the end of the session, we'll talk about a nice white paper we have that summarizes how to set up auditing and prevention for many of these attacks. So stay tuned for that. So Gerald, would you like to take over and explain what Change Auditor is and how it can help audit and prevent these types of attacks? I'm sure many folks on this call are familiar with this mature question solution. It's been out there for a while, but as I talk with many of my customers, they're still not taking advantage of all the security specific searches and alerts, let alone some of the unique and critical features like protection templates. So Gerald, you want to talk about some of that stuff?
Absolutely, Bob. Thanks. So, first of all, at Quest, one of the things we focus on with a lot of our solutions are to build them around this NIST framework. We want to focus on identifying what's happening within the environment, protecting it, and detecting what's happening. And with Change Auditor, with our Change Auditor solution, we have the ability to protect, as Bob mentioned, also detect all different kinds of alerts and things that happen within the environment. Then you want to be able to respond and then recover in worst case scenario. We offer solutions around each one of those pillars, and then being able to govern using all of our solutions collectively to be able to govern. Bob, you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Change Auditor. Change Auditor is a real-time auditing solution. It doesn't pull any event logs from your DCs. It's creating its own events by looking at your environment, determining what's happening, taking those agents and letting them go in and focus on key events and events that you specifically create within the solution to understand what's happening within the environment. So another thing that we have is the object protection, which Bob mentioned as well. And that's one of the ways to protect specific objects around items within Active Directory, your GPOs. We can even go as far as look at Exchange and Windows file systems, looking at privileged groups, your Entra ID accounts. So we have the ability to protect and look at different types of auditing events and determine if we want to block or keep people out of certain objects within Active Directory and other items. So as you look at the little diagram on the right-hand side of the screen, it also shows different things that Change Auditor, different licenses that could be added into Change Auditor to help protect your environment. So I mentioned Windows file servers. We do AD queries, Exchange and SharePoint, as well as logon activity, knowing what users are actively logging on to various systems within your environment. It can be very key to how to understand and identify what's going on within the environment. And then
No,
lastly,
yeah, go for it.
looking at compliance reports and understanding if you have a need to prove to different auditors and so forth what type of compliance you're keeping within your environment. We have that ability within Change Auditor as well.
You know, a lot of customers I talk to, current customers of Change Auditor, they always bring up the one thing that they love the most about Change Auditor is the normalized audit view, right? So every event that comes in, no matter it's an Active Directory event or some type of file auditing event, they all look the same, right? They have the who, the what, where, when, what we call the 5 W's of every event. So kind of unlike native auditing, where you make a change. Example I love to use is go make a change and modify the ACLs on a file share and take a look at the native event log. It's a bunch of GUIDs and SIDs and stuff you can't make heads or tails out of. We give you one very nice, easy to read event that gives you the who, what, where right in there. So in layman's terms,
I'll
that people
show
can
that.
understand.
And I'll show that.
Yeah, very good.
Presentation as well.
One other thing I wanted to mention, Gerald, was because it's a real-time auditing solution, the beauty is we get real-time alerts. So the second something happens in your environment is the second we get that alert on that. So really nice.
Excellent. All right. So how do we protect and how do we first audit the NTDS.dit file, which is your Active Directory database? How do we audit it? And then I'm going to show you how to protect it. So first we need to see what's working against or making changes to this DIT file. So it's not just adding users or things like that. These are processes that are going after your database. And so this will tell us when the file's being copied off. It's going to tell us when people are making ill-advised changes to the DIT file. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up auditing around the DIT file. So simple as this, we open up our administrative task within Change Auditor. We choose the Active Directory database, and then we simply click Add. And as you can see on this screen, we show that it's actually DIT file auditing, and then it shows some processes that are being exempted from being monitored so that we don't get a lot of noise and so forth.
Yeah.
So once again, this is where you would go in, you would give it a name, and then you would choose the processes that you want to filter out, that you don't want to see collecting the data on. So in our case, we have our backup agent. So I believe we're using something like backup exec, and we don't want to see auditing around that process constantly doing backups against the DIT file. So we're excluding it from being collected. So next, let's talk about how we're looking at this data within Change Auditor and how we're able to alert on it. So once you have this administrative task opened up, you can look at the events that are being audited, and it shows all the events that's going to be captured based on setting up this auditing. At this point, they're all set up out of the box. They're all set up as high-level alerts. You can, if something was a lesser of an event, you could change the severity to a medium or a low. But in our best practices, we keep them all as high because this is hitting your Active Directory database.
And one thing I want to mention, Gerald, these are all configurable. So we worked with Microsoft to get these different types of severities. Again, we're talking about DIT file specifically today, but we have hundreds and hundreds of audit events that we audit for, and you can change the severity. If something's coming in as high and you don't want it to be coming in as high, you're not that concerned about it, you can change that to medium or low just by clicking the mouse there and hitting the drop down and choosing medium. So very easy to do that stuff.
Yep, and you're also able to disable it. If it's something that's just a noisy event, you have the ability to disable it as well.
Very good. Let's show an example. There you go.
Yep. So just out of the box with Microsoft Native's tools, NTDS util, has the ability to go out and make a copy, a snapshot of your ntds.dit file. Take it offline, make changes to it, do whatever they need to do. But this process just shows the simple ability to go out and grab and extract your ntds.dit file. And what I'm going to show you is how Change Auditor can stop you from doing that. Let's go on to the next slide.
Yep.
So this slide basically just shows you the capabilities out of the box with Change Auditor. So we have the ability to look at DC shadow events, DC sync events, golden ticket expiration type events, as well as Kerberoasing. And as you can see, there's quite a bit here. It's a pretty extensive list, but Change Auditor has the ability to search and alert on all these types of events.
And these are some of the things I was talking about when I said earlier that, yes, Change Auditor has been around for a long time, but over the years, we've added so many different features and so many different capabilities, like adding DC Shadow, DC Sync, over time. So a lot of our customers, existing customers that have had the product for 10 years, don't even realize that they can capture a lot of this data and search for these types of things and detect when these types of TTPs are happening and things like that. So it's just a really nice list, and we'll talk a little bit more about, we have a nice best practices document that we'll mention later.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So how do we defend? How do we protect this DIT file from being extracted like we saw in the last screen? So we can proactively lock down a lot of different things within Change Auditor, and it's called our Change Auditor object protection. So we look at all types of Active Directory objects, DNS, OUs, and so forth, sensitive and sensitive groups and users that we don't want to make changes to, or we don't want to see changes made to, group policy objects and linkage. What we don't want people linking things to the root of your Active Directory domain. We have that ability to lock all these features down using our object protection. Then we even go as far as protecting mailboxes and Windows files and folders as well. But we're going to focus on with this is with just locking down the Active Directory database file itself.
Yep. And one thing I want to mention, I kind of mentioned it earlier, that we're not really talking about our Security Guardian product today, which kind of integrates with some of the Change Auditor agents that do some of these protections and things like that. But there is a feature in Security Guardian called Shields Up, where it will automatically be able to lock down your tier 0 assets and all of your crown jewels in the event of something going on in your environment. So I might mention a little more about that later.
Great. So locking down the database, similarly to alerting and auditing the database file, we want to use the same administrative task to lock it down and to create a template around the Active Directory database. So we would open up our administrative task. We would simply choose the Active Directory database. We would choose Add over to the right, and then we would create our template for the DIT file itself. And it's pretty simple. We give it a name. And once again, there's going to be processes that need access to this file. And it may not be an extensive list, but there will be some. And you can base a lot of that information on what you see coming through your audit log. So as you look at your auditing, you will see events that are hitting the DIT file, and then you can make those exemptions based on the need or the requirement. And in our example here, we have the backup agent, because we know we need to allow our backup agent to back up that DIT file, that database file.
Yeah, that's a really good point about using the auditing template, where you create the template and it starts auditing for access to your DIT file. You'll start to see some activity that is allowed to happen, right? And that'll kind of give you a tipping point as to what processes should I allow to happen to get through this protection. Anything other than that is what we want to stop, right? So here's an example of a bunch of exempt processes that we discovered in our lab, that yes, these types of things should be talking to the DIT file and things. So we put these exemptions into place, and those things get past the protection that we have.
Yep, very good, absolutely. So let's try to access that DIT file again. Let's try to extract it from its location. into a temp directory again, and let's see what's happening. Now that we have this lock in place, this object protection in place, and I'm using a simple account, I'm using my admin privileges to do this. And as you can see down at the bottom, it failed. It failed because there is a lock in place and we don't have access to unmount and move that DIT file to a temporary directory.
Yep. So even though you have the native rights to do it, our protection stopped this user from doing that.
Yep. And this is not a change to your directory privileges. This is Active Directory agent out there stopping that activity from happening.
That's a good point. Yeah, I always like the one we always use is it's the bouncer at the door, right? It's a bouncer at the door that allows you in or says you can't, right? So that agent is doing that piece. Very nice.
Yep, absolutely. So now once we go in and we look at the event or the searches around that Active Directory DIT file, we see that the results are protected. So we also see that it failed because of that protection. And if you look at the screen, it's a little bit busy, but the tabs, what that's highlighted is we're focusing on the Active Directory database. And as you see, the events that occurred just above that is all the events that tried to attempt to get access to that Active Directory database, and the results were that that object is protected.
Yeah, I always like to say that, you know, the result field is a really important field to do searching on and things like that, because the things that happen that were a success in your environment, yeah, it's important to know what happened in your environment. But the things that failed or the things that were protected are really important to know, because those are things you don't want to happen and people are trying to do something, right? So that results field is important.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we talked about this a while back, but this is the result of an actual event. And we talked about the 5 W's, the who made the change, where the change was made, what DC that change was made on, the what, and full description, full disclosure of what's happened in that change or that attempt of a change, and then when the change was made and what workstation was that change made on. So this gives us a full detail of who tried to make this attempt on our Active Directory database.
Exactly. And one more.
And so we talked about alerting. So we have the ability to search on the event. We also have the ability to alert, which is one of the key components of the NIST framework, where we're sending these events out to a group of people or an individual so that they can actively work on this and look at this and understand what's happening within the environment. They have the ability to respond if it was a user or if it was a failed attempt by someone or a group or a script that was running that tried to make a change out there. He has the ability to go out and see this in real time, that this has occurred, and then you can kind of interrogate and figure out, how to resolve this issue.
Yep. And I always like to mention, I mentioned it earlier, real-time alerting. So,
Yep.
The second that change happens, it's near instantaneous that you're getting an alert on that type of activity.
Yep.
So pretty nice from that perspective.
It's very quick.
All right. So I'm going to give us a summary here. So we talked about how to audit attempts to get to the DIT file, right? How do we show when that type of activity is happening? We've set up an auditing template right out of the box. Click add, click next, finish, and you have an auditing template and you're discovering that activity. How to search and find this activity. We showed you what searching looks like on that. Again, those searches are right out of the box for a lot of these different types of security events. But the biggest offense, and we continue to preach this, is actually setting up protection templates to block illegitimate access to the DIT file in the first place. So that's the biggest piece of the puzzle here that we want to point out today. I put 3 different links in here to help out. One of them is just kind of straight Change Auditor for the people on the call who aren't familiar with Change Auditor. The second is for what Quest is doing with ITDR. We've got a lot going on in that space. Again, not the focus here, but there is a link if you want to just go check out what we're doing with ITDR. And then, of course, our Security Guardian solution, which really complements a lot of the things that you can do with auditing solution like Change Auditor when you really want to get into better control around your tier 0 assets and doing security assessments and understanding what vulnerabilities exist in your Active Directory that you need to remediate. This is the product that also has that feature called Shields Up, which uses those Change Auditor agents. So it creates protection templates automatically and instantly locks down your tier 0 assets in the event of a suspected attack. So some really cool stuff in there. Check out. Also, I mentioned this white paper earlier in our discussion. This paper has all of the best practices for mitigating many of the common attacks. We kind of talked about a lot of those different things, the DC sync, DC shadow, this, that. This document will explain to you how to set up auditing templates for that, how to set up protection templates for that, how to set up alerting for all of that. So we'll either drop a link in the chat or just talk to your account executive to get a copy of this document. It includes the step-by-step guidance on how to configure everything, how to configure those templates to block things from happening in the first place. And with that, Gerald and I thank you, and we'll take any questions you might have now.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.